Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into
Wow.
Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Yes.
It's a dense book,
Yeah.
but absolutely brilliant, and we're here to kind of help you unlock some of its secrets.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish it. Dostoevsky really gets under the skin of his characters and explores these profound questions about morality and guilt and redemption.
Yeah, so for those who haven't read it or maybe need a little refresher, Crime and Punishment follows Rodion Raskolnikov. He's an impoverished ex-student in 19th century St. Petersburg. Yeah. And he commits this brutal murder. And the novel is essentially charting his psychological and spiritual journey in the aftermath of that.
And it's not just a crime thriller. Dostoevsky weaves in these rich themes of poverty and social injustice and alienation, the nature of good and evil. It's all there.
It's all there packed in. So let's start at the beginning. We're introduced to Raskolnikov. And he's not exactly in a good place. He's brilliant, but deeply alienated, struggling to survive in this city that's just rife with poverty and despair.
And what's so fascinating is how Dostoevsky presents Raskolnikov's descent into crime. It's not like a sudden decision. It's this gradual process of rationalization and self-justification.
Yeah, he's really trying to convince himself that this is the right thing to do.
Exactly.
And he develops this theory. Have you heard of the extraordinary man theory?
Yes.
He believes that certain individuals, like Napoleon, are exempt from moral laws.
Yeah.
They have the right to transgress, even to kill, if it serves a higher purpose.
And this theory becomes his justification for murdering Alyona Ivanovna, the pawnbroker. He views her as this parasitic louse, preying on the poor, and convinces himself that her death would actually benefit society.
Like he's trying to convince himself as much as the reader at times.
Yeah.
And there are these moments where you almost see this flicker of doubt, a hint of his conscience trying to break through.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most striking passages in the book is when Raskolnikov goes to pawn his father's watch with Alyona. The tension is just palpable. And Dostoevsky uses this evocative language to describe the scene. You can practically feel Raskolnikov's heart pounding as he is contemplating his plan.
Yeah, I love how Dostoevsky uses these sensory details to draw us into the story. The heat, the stench of the city, the claustrophobic atmosphere of Alyona's apartment. It all adds to this feeling of dread.
And then, of course, there's the unexpected arrival of Lizaveta, Alyona's sister, which completely throws his plan into chaos.
Right. It's like everything that could possibly go wrong does go wrong.
Exactly.
And the murders themselves are brutal and frenzied, and the aftermath is just as harrowing.
Absolutely.
Raskolnikov is just consumed by paranoia and guilt. He's obsessed with every detail, every potential clue that could lead back to him.
And it's not just the external pressure of the investigation. It's this internal torment that's eating him alive. Dostoevsky so brilliantly portrays Raskolnikov's psychological unraveling, this descent into this feverish, almost delirious state.
Yeah, and that's where the dreams come in. He has these vivid, disturbing dreams that reflect his guilt and paranoia.
Like the one where he dreams of the old woman laughing at him. It's chilling. And it shows how deeply the crime has affected him on a subconscious level.
So while Raskolnikov is spiraling, we're introduced to Porfiry Petrovich, the detective investigating the murders. And he's not your typical detective.
No, he's not. He's incredibly perceptive, almost like a mind reader. He sees right through Raskolnikov's facade and engages him in these philosophical debates about crime and punishment.
It's like a psychological chess match between the two.
Exactly.
Porfiry's trying to break Raskolnikov down to get him to confess not just to the crime, but to the flawed ideology that led him to it.
Yes, and Raskolnikov is both drawn to and repelled by Porfiry. He's terrified of being caught, but also almost yearning for the relief that confession might bring.
And this internal conflict is so central to the novel, right? This tension between Raskolnikov's pride and his conscience, his desire to escape punishment, but also this deeper need for redemption.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how Dostoevsky portrays Raskolnikov's interactions with the other characters. He pushes people away, he isolates himself, yet at the same time, he craves human connection.
Yeah, his relationship with his family, especially his mother and sister Dunya, is particularly poignant.
Yes, there's this deep love and sense of obligation, but it's also complicated by his pride, his shame, his fear of being exposed.
Yeah, he wants to protect them, but he ends up hurting them in the process. And then there's Sonia Marmeladov, the young woman forced into prostitution to support her family.
Sonia is such a fascinating, complex character. She represents this kind of pure, almost saintly suffering.
Yeah, and despite her circumstances, she has this unwavering faith, this belief in the possibility of redemption, even for someone like Raskolnikov.
And it's to Sonia that Raskolnikov eventually confesses his crime. This scene is so powerful, and you can just see how much he's struggling, how he's torn between this desperate need to unburden himself and this fear of the consequences.
And it's Sonia who encourages him to confess to the authorities, to seek redemption through accepting his punishment.
But it's not just about legal punishment. She believes that true redemption comes through genuine repentance, through this transformation of the heart.
So we've got this incredibly compelling protagonist in Raskolnikov, this brilliant detective in Porfiry, and this incredibly compassionate figure in Sonia. And they're all caught up in this web of guilt and punishment and the search for meaning.
And it's important to remember that Dostoevsky is not just telling a story, he's exploring these profound philosophical and psychological questions.
Yeah.
You know what drives a person to commit such a horrific act? Can true redemption ever be achieved? These are the questions that the novel is grappling with.
Yeah, and it's not just about Raskolnikov's individual journey. Dostoevsky is also painting this vivid portrait of 19th century St. Petersburg, a city teeming with poverty and social injustice, and a sense of moral decay.
Right, so the novel's also a social commentary, a critique of the conditions that can lead to crime and despair.
Yeah, it's really looking at the bigger picture. And then there are all these other fascinating characters and subplots that add to the richness of the story. Marmeladov and his tragic family, Dunya and her unwanted suitor Luzhin, the enigmatics Fyodor, they all represent different facets of Russian society at the time.
And their stories intersect with Raskolnikov's in ways that both illuminate and complicate his own journey.
It's a truly epic novel, and we've only just scratched the surface. We'll delve deeper into these themes and characters in the next part of our deep dive.
So picking up where we left off, one of the most fascinating aspects of crime and punishment is how Dostoevsky explores the concept of suffering as a potential path to redemption.
Okay, so we left Raskolnikov at a crossroads. He's confessed to Sonia, but he's still grappling with his guilt and his pride. He's not quite ready to turn himself in.
Right, and it's interesting to see how other characters react to his confession, like his mother, for instance. She's completely devastated, but her love for him never wavers.
She's almost in denial, right? Like she can't believe that her son is capable of such an act.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dunya, on the other hand, is much more pragmatic. She wants him to confess, to take responsibility for his actions.
Right, but she's also fiercely protective of him. Remember how she stands up to Luzhin, her manipulative suitor, when he tries to use Raskolnikov's crime to his advantage?
Oh yeah, she's not going to let anyone take advantage of her brother.
Exactly. She's this incredibly strong, independent woman, and her loyalty to her brother is unwavering. But going back to Sonia, her response to Raskolnikov's confession is truly remarkable.
She doesn't judge him. She sees his suffering, his desperation, and she offers him compassion and guidance.
Yeah, she urges him to confess not just to escape punishment, but to find peace, to begin the process of atonement. She truly believes that suffering can lead to redemption, and she points him toward the story of Lazarus in the Bible.
Oh yeah, the idea of resurrection, of new life emerging from death. That's a powerful image, and it really speaks to Raskolnikov's need for a spiritual rebirth.
Right.
But he's still resisting. He's not fully on board with this idea yet.
He is. He's still clinging to his theory of the extraordinary man, this idea that he's somehow above the law. And then we have Svidrigailov, this darkly fascinating character who represents a kind of moral abyss.
Ooh, yeah, he's a creepy one. He's drawn to Dunya, but his obsession is unhealthy, almost predatory. And his own actions, his past sins, are hinted at throughout the novel.
Right. Svidrigailov is like a mirror to Raskolnikov, showing him the potential consequences of his own moral transgressions. He represents a path that Raskolnikov could easily follow, a descent into nihilism and self-destruction.
And his eventual suicide is both shocking and, in a way, inevitable. It's like he's reached the end of the line and there's no redemption for him.
Exactly, which makes Raskolnikov's ultimate decision to confess even more significant. He chooses a different path. A path that offers at least the possibility of redemption.
And it's Porfiry Petrovich, the detective, who finally pushes him towards that decision. Not through force, but through this subtle psychological game.
Right. Porfiry sees through Raskolnikov's intellectual posturing. He understands that true justice isn't just about punishment. It's about confronting the truth, accepting responsibility.
And he gives Raskolnikov a choice. He can confess and face the legal consequences, or he can continue to live with the torment of his guilt, knowing that he'll likely be caught eventually.
And it's in that moment, facing those two options, that Raskolnikov finally breaks. He goes to Sonia seeking her comfort and guidance, and then he goes to the police station and confesses.
And this confession isn't a moment of sudden enlightenment. It's more of a gradual surrender. a recognition that he can no longer bear the weight of his secret.
Exactly. He's still wrestling with his pride, his resentment, but there's a glimmer of hope, a sense that he's finally taking the first step towards a genuine change.
And his sentence, exile to Siberia, a harsh and unforgiving land.
Right, and this punishment isn't just about physical hardship, it's about removing him from society, forcing him to confront his actions in isolation.
And the fact that Sonia chooses to follow him, to share his exile, speaks volumes about her character, her unwavering faith in his potential for redemption.
She becomes his anchor, his source of hope and strength in the midst of his suffering. But even in Siberia, Raskolnikov's journey is far from over. He's still haunted by his past, by the memory of his crime.
He's surrounded by other criminals, men who have committed terrible acts, and yet he still sees himself as different, as somehow superior.
He's still clinging to that pride, that sense of intellectual arrogance. He's resisting the idea of true repentance, the humility that Sonia embodies.
So is it the harshness of Siberia, the reality of his punishment, that finally forces him to confront himself?
It's more nuanced than that. It's a combination of factors: the physical hardship, the isolation, Sonia's unwavering love and faith, and perhaps most importantly, the gradual realization that his intellectual theories have failed him.
His theory of the extraordinary man has crumbled in the face of his own experience.
Precisely. He sees the suffering he's caused, the pain he's inflicted on his loved ones, and he begins to understand the true cost of his actions. And it's in that understanding and that acceptance of his own fallibility that the possibility of true redemption emerges.
So we follow Raskolnikov through his crime, his confession, and his punishment. But the big question that remains is, does he actually achieve redemption?
Well, that's the heart of the novel, isn't it? Dostoevsky doesn't really offer a simple answer. He leaves it open to interpretation. But we do see a shift in Raskolnikov in those final chapters.
Yeah, like he has that dream about the plague, where everyone believes they're right and it leads to chaos and destruction. It just seems so symbolic, like he's finally seeing the flaw in his own ideology.
Absolutely. I think that dream is so crucial. It really suggests that he's starting to move beyond his intellectual arrogance and his isolation. He's recognizing the need for connection, for humility.
And there's that powerful scene where he finally breaks down and embraces Sonia. It's like he's letting go of all of his pride, his resistance, and allowing himself to finally be loved.
That scene is so emotionally charged. You can just feel it coming. I think it's a real turning point for him. It suggests a genuine change of heart, an acceptance of his own vulnerability.
But it's not like a sudden transformation, right?
Right.
Even in those final moments, he still struggles with doubts and with anger and resentment.
Yeah, exactly. Redemption is a process. It's not a destination. And Dostoevsky shows us that it's messy and difficult, full of setbacks and internal conflict.
So we're left with this image of Raskolnikov on the threshold of a new life. But we don't know for sure what that life will look like.
And I think that ambiguity is intentional. Dostoevsky is inviting us to consider the possibility of redemption, to grapple with the complexities of human nature, and to recognize that even in the face of great suffering, hope can emerge.
It's a really powerful message. So beyond Raskolnikov's individual journey, what are some of the other key themes that resonate throughout Crime and Punishment?
Well, one that's impossible to ignore is poverty. Dostoevsky paints such a stark portrait of St. Petersburg's underclass, the desperation and the degradation that can drive people to desperate acts.
Right, like the Marmoladov family. Their story is heartbreaking. You really see the cycle of poverty and alcoholism and exploitation that traps them.
And Dostoevsky doesn't shy away from showing the social inequalities of the time. He contrasts the poverty of characters like the Marmoladovs with the relative wealth and privilege others.
Yeah, it's a reminder that societal forces can play a significant role in shaping individual choices and destinies.
Absolutely. Another major theme is alienation. Raskolnikov is so profoundly alienated from society, from his family, even from himself.
And that alienation is partly what fuels his crime. It allows him to detach himself from others and to justify his actions.
Precisely. He sees himself as separate, as superior, which blinds him to the consequences of his choices.
And Dostoevsky explores this theme through other characters as well. Like Dunya, for example. She experiences alienation as a woman in a patriarchal society.
Right, and Svidrigailov is a figure of extreme alienation, detached from any moral compass, driven by his own dark desires.
So Crime and Punishment is this multi-layered novel that speaks to these timeless human concerns. Poverty, alienation, the struggle between good and evil, the search for meaning and redemption.
And it's told with such psychological depth and narrative power. It stays with you long after you finish reading it.
It really does. I think what makes it so enduring is that it doesn't offer easy answers. It challenges us to confront the complexities of human nature, to question our own assumptions about morality and justice.
And it reminds us that even in the darkest of circumstances, the possibility of hope, of change, of redemption can never be entirely extinguished.
So if you're looking for a book that will challenge you intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, Crime and Punishment is definitely a must-read.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, one question that lingers for me is, does society bear any responsibility for the crimes of individuals like Raskolnikov? If poverty and alienation contribute to criminal behavior, what can we do to create a more just and compassionate world?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. Crime and Punishment doesn't provide any simple solutions, but it forces us to grapple with these difficult questions, to consider the interconnectedness of our lives and our choices.
And it's a novel that invites multiple readings, multiple interpretations, and that's part of its enduring power. It continues to speak to us, to challenge us, to provoke us, generations after it was written.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Crime and Punishment. We hope it sparked some interesting thoughts and encouraged you to explore this remarkable novel further.